Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at Etrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Blue Ox base plate on a 2023 Ford Maverick. When it comes to flat towing your Maverick down the road, there's going to be 5 main required components that you're going to want. And the first one, starting on the vehicle side, is going to be the structural mounting point that goes to the frame of the vehicle and allows you to safely tow it down the road. It's also going to give you all the mounting points for the rest of your components. So base plate's number 1. The second thing is going to be the connection point between the base plate and the RV, and that's going to be your tow bar. Your tow bar is how you essentially hook up to your RV and hook up to that base plate and safely go down the road. But just like a trailer, when you're towing, you have safety cables. These are going to be in case of any disconnect. The cables are going to keep everything attached, so they go on the safety chain loops on the hitch on your RV as well as the base plate. We also have diode wiring, and this is going to transmit the light signals from the taillights on the RV to the taillights on your Maverick, giving you running lights, turn signals, and brake lights, keeping you safe and legal, and keeping it looking OEM in the process. Also, sometimes braking systems are going to require you tapping into diode wiring, and that was the case on ours today with a Stay and Play Duo. Speaking of that, a braking system is going to be required on this vehicle, and that's going to apply the brakes proportionally as you apply the brakes on your RV, bringing it to a slow or stop depending on how you brake. And then also this breakaway switch is your last line of defense. If everything was to fail and you lost contact with towing down the road, it's going to pull this cable, and that's going to apply the brakes on your Maverick, bringing it to a stop so it's not rolling down the road. So this is what it's going to look like when it's installed and you're just going down the road driving the vehicle normally. So again, really clean look. It doesn't protrude much, and it's really nice. They give you little caps here. You can pull these out, and these are just going to keep any grime from building up. Obviously, as you're going down the road, you can get a lot of water or just snow, slush, mud, whatever it may be, and that can make it a little bit more difficult for your arms to slide in. When you are ready to flat tow, these just simply push in, put a little tension, and you can twist it one way or the other, and that's going to lock in place, and then you're ready to hook up your tow bar. To remove it, super simple, just pull this, quarter turn, and they pop out. So we'll get these in place, and I'll show you how to hook it all up. Now, if you're an experienced flat tower, this is going to be a cakewalk for you, because really you're just taking your components and making sure that they hook up to every spot that's on the base plate. So the first thing we'll do is get our tow bar in place. Now, this is an Etrailer SD tow bar, which is a really great option, especially for something like the Maverick, and it has a built-in riser drop. So before I continue connecting everything up, something that's going to be important and something that makes the SD stand out is going to be the built-in high-low adapter. So as we measure from the ground to the center of our pin on our arm, we're coming in at about 14.5 inches. And that's going to be important to note, because you can measure from the ground to the center of the hitch pin hole on your RV, and it should be within a 3-inch window of each other. So what that means is you may need a high-low adapter to get your tow bar as level as possible. Something like the Etrailer SD, as you can see, this shank down here has a built-in riser drop. I believe it to be about 1.5 inches, but that can be enough to get everything nice and level. So that's something that you may want to check out ahead of time to make sure everything's level before hitting the road. And something else that I'll point out is this is a Blue Ox base plate, but an Etrailer tow bar. Well, if you have a Roadmaster tow bar, a Blue Ox, a Demco, or literally any brand, most of them have adapters that you can get here at Etrailer to account for that. So, you can get a Roadmaster end for this, but we want it to match to our base plate. So we got our Blue Ox ends put on our tow bar, and now it hooks up with no problem. So don't let different brands, worry you that it's not going to be cohesive. There's always a way to make it work. So just like towing a trailer, we have safety cables here, and again, these are nice and easy. They stick out just far enough to where it's, you're not going to have any issue or cause damage to the fascia by hooking up, but also they're not anything where it takes away from the look of the vehicle. Once you get your safety cables on, you'll then get your diode wiring installed or plugged in, your breakaway switch for your braking system, and then you can repeat on the other side. Once everything's all hooked up properly, you can get your braking system set up or powered on, get your vehicle in flat tow mode, and then from here, you're ready to flat tow down the road. So great option. If you're looking at this base plate for your Maverick, I do recommend it. This is a great one to get. They're all pretty decent, to be honest. So it really comes down to what are you looking for? What's the finished product? Some of them mount a little bit differently and may require a little bit more trimming than others. So feel free to take a look at those. And throughout the process, if you're installing this yourself, let us know how it went. If there were some tips or tricks that maybe could have helped someone else, please comment. That helps us make our videos better for the next time we use that information, because at the end of the day, we're trying to make this the best possible installation video for neighbors like you, so you can get this installed at home and not have to worry about someone else having to do it. So hopefully the video helps. And speaking of that, let's take a look at it. Before we get into the installation, a few things that I want to point out just from doing a ton of different base plates over time is if you're going to be doing your base plate, I highly, highly recommend having the rest of your flat tow components ready to go. A lot of them are going to be mounted up behind the fascia on the base plate, and so it's a lot easier to do all of that work when this fascia is off. You can get the wires to be ran clean. So again, I definitely recommend doing that. Something else is going to be you're going to have the fascia off for a little bit while you're doing those components, so having a nice organized spot to keep all of your hardware will make it a lot less of a headache to get everything back together when you're missing pieces. So keep those in order. It'll definitely help you out. So first step, open up your hood, and we're going to attack some of the hardware that's on our radiator cover here, and really that's going to start to separate the mounting points of the fascia to where we can get this taken down. So the first thing we're going to attack is going to be the 10mm screws that we have located right here. There's also going to be some plastic push pins that we're going to remove. We'll have one here and one on the other side. And throughout the process of removing things for the base plate, plastic push pins are fairly simple. They can be frustrating at times, but these have a slot on them. So if you use a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool like we have, if you pull up on that center, normally you can get the whole thing to come out by prying on the bottom. If it does separate, just make sure you have both of the pieces. And if they break, don't be surprised. These can be pretty brittle at times, and if they really fight you, they can be a pain. If that's the case, we do sell extra push pins that you can replace those with, or you can generally go to an auto parts store. Now, with those removed, this snaps in up top, and we don't necessarily need to pull it back, but I am going to point it out while we're here. The clips where that 10mm was, you'll see this small tab. That locks this into place. So what you can do is push down on the tab while putting pressure back, and you'll see that it's going to maybe want to try to snap back in. Once we get the rest of the hardware taken off, that's going to allow us to get the fascia off. So you don't have to separate them here. Just be aware of those later on when I talk about them. Now our next step is going to be attacking the hardware that holds the front fascia onto the front fender. And in order to gain access to that, you're going to go to the wheel well liner up at the front. And we're going to find that we have quite a few plastic push pins, and we can leave this top one here, but getting these ones taken out as we go is going to allow us to peel that liner back. Now something else that I'll point out is going to be the mud flaps have a 7mm screw. There's going to be 3 of them that we want to take out, as well as a plastic push pin. And the main thing that we're trying to do is make sure that it's separated, so as you remove those, you can start to pull out this wheel well liner and make sure that it's actually separated from the fascia. Now this can get pretty tight here. I have a small 7mm ratchet socket combo for these. If you're fighting space to get in here for anything, and especially when we start to get to the hardware up here, what you can do is hop in the vehicle, turn the wheel to one side or the other. That's really going to open it up for you to be able to gain access to those. So if you need to do that, go ahead. So first thing, getting this wheel well liner popped back, that's going to be what we're going to want to do. So once that hardware is removed, again, you should be able to separate this. There is a clear gap between our wheel well liner and our fascia, so we know that's separated. And then just work your way up There's a tab that kind of holds this in place. If you just peel this back a little bit, like I said, you can leave this one here. The hardware that we're going to be attacking is going to be 3 10mm bolts. And so there's one here, there's one further up, and one that's kind of tucked up high here. So they can get a little bit tricky. A lot of times if you have like a ratcheting 10mm wrench, it's going to work well. I've found best bet for me is I have electric ratchet, which makes it easy, but a swivel and a 10mm socket allows me to still kind of get that at an angle where I can get these removed. So take your time. Again, just 3 of those 10mm bolts. There are clips that keep this in place as well. So once we get those removed, you don't have to worry about it falling off or anything like that. Now, underneath the fascia, there's an underbody panel that goes to the front portion of our fascia, and you'll see a staggered hardware set on each of them. It's going to be a T30 Torx bit to get those taken off. So we'll get not only the one on the underbody panel, but also on our fascia. Now at this point we have the hardware that was holding our fascia in place off, and to get the fascia off isn't terribly difficult. You might want an extra set of hands to pull this off and have a safe place to put it so it's not going to get damaged in the process. And there's a few different places that we're going to want to attack. I already mentioned that clip up top, so that's something that's good. If you have that popped out still, you can just kind of pull pressure back. And on the fascia, now this fascia I believe has been off before, just seen some of the scratches here. But if you've never pulled your fascia off, these can get a little bit tricky because of this clip, but really all this does is just snap in. And so if you can reach behind and press on this clip to get those tabs to pull out, you should be able to drop this out fairly easily. Don't put a ton of stress on here because this small portion is rather thin. You don't want to rip off your mounting tabs. So reach back, push on this tab, you can squeeze those together and then push, and you should be able to get it to where it's going to sit something like this. Get both sides like that, and with these 2 top clips undone, the whole thing's going to want to come off. But there's still snaps here on the trim that goes to the headlight, so what I recommend doing is reach your fingers on the back side of this, and you're going to just lightly pull. If you can get little pressure next to the clips rather than a pull, like a long pull away from it, you're really going to reduce the potential for cracking of any of the plastics. So once you have the side, these top clips as well as your headlight clips undone, this should kind of just slide out like we see here, but it's also important not to just pull it straight back because we do have some connections that we're going to want to separate. And this is where having that extra set of hands comes in place. While I have John helping me hold up the fascia, that's going to allow me to get this plug on the passenger side separated. We just push the tab in, pull that back, and then from here we should have our fascia completely removed and we can set it aside. Now you might notice the tape that I put on the fascia as well as the front fender. It's a nice easy way to prevent scratches when you pull it off, but also when you put it back on. So if you wanted to run some painter's tape on those edges, by all means. So with the fascia off, this is when we're really going to start to make room for that base plate, and the basics of it are it's going to go across this front portion. So a lot of this will need to be modified in order for that to fit and fit properly. So the first thing that we're going to remove is going to be this shroud that goes around our active air shutters. We will be reinstalling this a little bit later, so we can just set it aside for now. To get it popped off, pretty simple. We have a plastic push pin on each side, so we'll get those removed first. And then there's just a series of clips, and it's, I think, easiest to see on the bottom. If you peel this rubber portion back, these clips are what are holding it on. So if you just push down and then pull back slightly, you can just make your way across the entire bottom to where that's done, and then the top is going to be very similar with the clips up here. So this one, it looks like if you pry up, that makes it a lot easier. So a small flathead or a trim panel tool like this, shouldn't be a whole lot of resistance here, and as long as your bottom clips don't pop back in like mine did, you should be able to set this aside. Something else that we're going to want to remove that's going to give us some room is going to be our pedestrian alert device, and that's what you hear when you're in reverse or if you're in hybrid mode and it's making that noise to alert people. So getting this out of the way, again, the base plate's going to kind of mount this area. Super easy, 8mm bolt. We'll just loosen this up first. And There is a alignment tab on this, so if you want to just kind of wiggle that out, you'll see that kind of just sits in there. And I'm going to unplug this so it's out of the way, so just push down on the tab and you can set this aside for later reinstallation. Now, right where the horn was, we also have this black box, and this is going to be, it looks like a main component for the vehicle, but this is going to be in the way of our base plate getting bolted up. So we want to loosen this up and get it out of the way. And first thing you'll loosen up is going to be this 10mm nut. And we're going to try to get this whole thing loose, but there's going to be other hardware that's tucked behind the wheel well liner that's kind of tricky to see. And from what I'm gathering, there's a nut that's located here, and then it looks like down here. So we see these two studs. I'm going to try to get those loosened up. Now you'll have to push back on that wheel well liner to gain access to them, and they are going to be a little bit tricky here. And it is a long stud back there, so I do recommend a deep well socket to be able to get those taken out. So I got the first one. I'll work on the second one here. And then there's also some plastic clips kind of holding this in place. So I'm going to push this back and see what else we can separate here. Now to get the rest of this black box loosened up, it's going to be a little tricky here just on the wheel well. So the first one that you're going to attack, if you look at the wire harness that's fastened to the frame rail, there's a blue and a black wire here. Right back here, there's a 10mm bolt. We're going to get that removed, and then if you follow this wire down, this is going to be attached to a stud. It's located right here, and so I'm going to pry that back using either a flathead or a trim panel tool here will work. But if we get that popped off, that should give us access to the other 10mm stud that we're going to be removing. So you'll see that this plastic clip just slides over that stud to hold it in place, but underneath that is a nut. So they're pretty well in line with each other. They're on this support brace that goes all the way down, so just make sure you get those two, and we'll get those taken out. Now the stud that wiring was held onto is actually a threaded bolt with a nut already welded on. So if it comes out like this, do not be surprised. You didn't shear your head off, you didn't break anything. But with those all taken out, we'll just slide this back. And this is going to give us a lot of space here to work. We may end up needing to undo our electrical connections just because this is still pretty well attached to a lot of different wires. So as we get a little bit closer and start to work on areas here, I'll let you know what I removed to make it a little bit easier, but for now, we have this loosened up. Now, our base plate eventually is going to live across this, so again, we're going to be making clearance for that, and part of that's going to be trimming the active shutters that we have on our Maverick. And if you cut along this molding here where it starts to bend down, we'll just go along this line. Whatever you have available for cutting is going to be fine, but a lot of times like a reciprocating tool like this or oscillating tool works really well to get some nice clean cuts. So either way, we're just going to be cutting through this plastic here. And then once you cut through that, you should be able to take this end and just kind of pop this down and off. And that's going to allow us to get the rest of the shutters out. So really all you have to do is take a small screwdriver and pry this out. And this whole thing's going to be coming out and we're going to be trimming, so don't be afraid if you accidentally break something here. I'm going to try to push these tabs in and get this to come out. So the best bet, if you pry on this bottom end, it just kind of unsnaps, and then the rest of it should come with it if you slide it out this way. Now we're going to be trimming out a portion of where those shutters were, and I've taped that out. It's very possible we're going to be trimming more, but I like to start small. We can always cut more if necessary. And something that you're going to really want to be careful of is, you are going to have some hard lines back here. They're tucked back a little ways, and there's also going to be some wiring. And so really making sure you don't damage those in the process is going to be important. And a good way to help with the wiring is going to be these plastic push pins here. Just push those back in. That's where a loom of wire is, and you can just kind of shove those back. And then when cutting, that's why I like the oscillating tool. It really doesn't go that deep as long as you kind of hold it by the surface. But if you're using a Dremel or something along those lines, just keep it pretty close to the plastic. Don't go too far back and cause any damage that, you know, is not going to be fun to fix later on. So we'll get that trimmed out, and we're going to be doing the same on the other side. And as I mentioned, we may end up trimming a little bit further back here, but I think this is going to be a good baseline for us. And so with that cutout, you can see pretty clearly that the wires are here, and those are the hard lines that I was talking about for AC. So pushing these back, that's really going to help us out. But also, again, just keep that in mind when trimming. Don't take that blade and just go ham, because it can very much damage those wires. So I'll get the other side trimmed out, and then we can move along from there. Now, with those cut out, that really gives me an idea of what's behind there, so I'm not going to cause any issues. And it does look like, from the instructions, that we do obviously need to go back a little bit further, so I'm just going to go ahead and preemptively cut that. And there is another plastic push on the bottom here for our wire, and so that allows me to really tuck this back. And there's a spot here, this hex, I'm going to cut to that and make this a nice clean cut. But something else that you'll notice is this inside plastic flap. We have this on both sides. We want to get rid of that. So if you just cut at the top to get this plastic piece taken out, that's what we're going to be doing. But again, we have hard lines here, so maybe just pull this back while you trim it to get that piece out, and then we'll widen this out. Now, something that I've found with almost all base plate installations on the Maverick is one of the weirdest tricky parts is going to be getting the pedestrian alert pack. A lot of times your base plate's in the way, and there's not a ton of excess on the wire to be able to get this to connect at an odd location. So Blue Ox has noticed that and taken care to fix that by including a bracket that's going to allow us to mount this back up. So we will need to pull off this outer shroud, and there's just going to be 3 T20 Torx screws to get those out. So remove these and hold on to that hardware, because we'll be attaching our bracket with it. And to get our new bracket attached, you'll see the bend. Have that going away from the plug, but this should be in line with it. So you can see we have that gap there. So just get that aligned properly, and then we'll put our hardware back in place. And to reinstall the bracket and our pedestrian alert device, we're going to want to push out the wire that, the harness that attaches to this, and that's going to be twofold. It's going to give us not only a little bit more wiggle room with the wiring, but also we're going to be utilizing this spot to put our hardware through. So I'm going to get my trim panel tool, and then I'm going to pry this off. With that now open, we can plug this in. And if you want a little bit more wire, if you trace this back, there is another plastic clip. It's going to be this one here. If you push that out, that'll give you a little bit more room to work with. And that was always the issue trying to remount these up, was the wire is just not long enough. So this bracket really makes it a lot easier to get this in place. So first snap this in. Got that attached, and then we'll be using the hardware that comes with the kit. So just a 3/4 bolt and then a nylon lock nut, and we'll just line that up with that tab, and then I'll get my hardware in place. It is pretty tight here, so just take your time, and then we'll get it all snug down. And before tightening, the goal is to get this as centered as possible, or close to the center, but as high as possible. So when you go to snug it down, just raise this up, and that way it's going to hold it up. And to get this snug down, you don't need power tools, but you will want an extension. And in fact, I would recommend not using anything too powerful, because it's just a plastic tab. We don't want to overdo it and crack it. But when it comes time to tightening down that hardware, on the bolt head, an 11mm socket or 3/8 generally will work. And then if you go to the nut side, that's going to be a 7/16. So I have an extension here. I'm going to feed this in by hand, make sure it's threaded, and then just snug everything down. And when tightening, you're going to want to be on the back of that bolt head. Now we're going to start to get the side portion of our base plate installed, and this is going to be where sometimes we may want to loosen up more here, but let's just go step by step. So the first thing we're going to be doing is taking out these two 13mm bolts. And then I have our side-specific base plate end here. And so something that you're going to want to do is make sure that this is the proper side. So this will bolt up to those bottom. This is going to mount up to the center section. So that should be, pretty well aligned like this. So we have this wing tab. That is going to bolt up top. And eventually we're going to be drilling holes in here. So as we hold this up, that's going to let you know pretty quickly what we need to move. So I believe this wiring harness will move, but also this tab is going to bolt up to a 16mm bolt that's located right here behind the bumper beam. So we're going to want to pop that off and make sure that this can align up properly. So let's get that taken off. So now we'll get this in place. So we'll just slide this all in. This is going to be on the outside here of this beam that's going down. So just make sure that goes over the wires of that black box and everything looks like it's lining up just fine. So we can put our 13mm bolts back in as well as that 16mm bolt. And now you can start to see why our pedestrian alert, we want it as high as possible to get that out of the way. And hopefully that shouldn't cause any issues with that center portion of our base plate. Now we're going to be leaving this loose because we're going to want some adjustability as we get everything bolted up. Just make sure there's enough threads to where it's obviously going to hold it in place, but you can still move this around as necessary. And the same goes for that top bolt. Once the driver's side is in place and loosely attached with the hardware, we're just going to repeat the same steps on the passenger side. So again, the two 13mm bolts as well as that 16, and then we'll get our passenger side plate in place. With those side plates loosely installed, this is a great chance to really mock this up and figure out where we need to trim. So immediately I can tell I'm not going to be able to get this to fit, and something that I maybe went over a little quick, but when we trimmed out this center section, we are going to want to get this part taken out as well. That's going to give us that clearance, and as I mentioned, it's very possible we're going to need to trim on these ends. So I'll get this cut out and then mock it up until we can get all those holes to align just fine without putting pressure on anything. So holding this up, everything looks pretty close to aligning. I am going to want to trim just a little bit more on this shroud just to account for the base plate to make it a nice clean fit. So I'll just take out a small section here. This pedestrian alert device, just make sure that's out of the way too. Because we're going to be putting hardware through here. So let me get this trimmed out and then I'll show you how to get this attached. Now we'll grab 6 bolts that look like this and 6 nylon lock nuts, and this is going to be how we attach it. Now I did put some thread lock on here and I recommend doing the same. The same goes for the hardware that we put back in place. If you wanted to put thread lock on that, you can absolutely do that. And what we're going to be doing is raising it up, get 1 bolt passed on each side so it'll support itself, and that'll allow us to get the rest of the hardware in. And that's why we leave these loose, because it's very possible it's not going to want to line up perfectly, but we'll slide this in, and you might want an extra set of hands here. It's a little cumbersome and it's a little heavy, but I'll just raise this up. I'm going to pass this through. And I'm going to just get a few threads started on this one, and then I'll get the other side, and then I'll come back and get the rest of the hardware in place. Now our goal while tightening this all down is to keep this as level as possible and also tilted to where it's going to be completely perpendicular with the vehicle so it's not angling down or anything along those lines. And something that might help is snugging these down first. That draws this in. Now, you don't want to get too crazy. You still want to be able to adjust everything, and you may have to loosen as necessary. But something that I looked for is this side plate. Eventually, we're going to be bolting up through this area. So this top hole should be pretty well clear. You may see a little metal hanging out. On the other side, it's pretty tight just because of that box. But if this is lined up with that hole, you're looking pretty good there. And it should, based on how this is, meant to fit the Maverick really well. So it comes down to these bolts here, getting this all tightened up. You do have a little bit of wiggle room, but when tightening it down, I recommend having a 3/4 inch box end wrench on the nut and then a 3/4 inch socket on the outside. You don't need to get too terribly crazy here. We're just going to snug it down because we are going to come back with a torque wrench. But yeah, we'll get these buzzed down and see how everything looks. Now once you're happy, everything's nice and lined up, I don't know if I could get much better. This is when we're going to torque everything down to get it all set in place. And torque settings are going to be found in a chart in the instruction manual. So just refer to the hardware that you're tightening down, which these ones are 1/2 inch bolts. So you can take a look at that, and we'll go through, get these all torqued down properly. With that torqued down, we're going to grab the included zip tie, and as you probably remember this wire, we're going to get this zip tied up to the base plate, making sure that it's not going to make contact with our AC or our hard lines here. It's just going to prevent any damage from occurring. So since those mounting points are gone, this is just going to keep it away. You can probably get this bottom one in if you choose to. But if not, no big deal, because the main thing is we grab the rest of the harness and we just kind of pull this over to where it's not going to make contact. So I'll just route my zip tie up and we'll get this wrapped around. And this is going to keep that in place. Now I'm going to be showing you this next step on the passenger side because you can actually see it all. The other one has quite a bit in the way, but it's going to be the same concept. And what we're looking to do is take this nut plate, and this is going to go behind here, up through the frame rail, and allow us to get our hardware in. So the top, that's why I mentioned you might want to have that lined up, because this will pass through and thread in, the larger bolt here. So I do recommend taking your nut plate, and sometimes you'll get a little bit of slag just from the welds, and really makes it difficult to thread these through. So I recommend first making sure that your hardware can feed through. If not, you may need to use a tap to just run through that to clear out those. But once you're happy with that, you're going to see that the top one, that shouldn't be a problem. The bottom is still metal there, so we want to drill that out. We're going to be using a 3/8 drill bit to accomplish that, but this creates a nice template for you to be able to do that. So grab a 3/8 drill bit and your drill. Let's get this hole made. Once drilled out, make sure that your bolt can pass through just fine. And in order to give us a little bit more space to be able to slide that weld plate in place, we're going to grab this small little tab and just a pair of channel locks or pliers really, and we're going to just bend this out of the way. It's going to open up that window for us to be able to get that slit in place. And along with bending this rod that's attached to it, you can absolutely bend that. And you may need to just to get this lined up. So I'm going to put just a small bend here and then just feed this up. And you can see why we bent that tab out of the way. And once that's slid, you should be able to get the holes aligned. So I can see both the threads there. We are going to put some thread lock on our bolts, and then we're going to get these started by hand. If you hold that up and just keep it as flush to the metal as possible, you should be able to thread this in by hand. That's why it's important to test to make sure you can do that from the beginning. Otherwise, if there's anything holding up, it's going to be kind of a pain here. And you can reach back here also to kind of hold that in place. So this is actually one of the easier slide-in weld nut plates that I've dealt with, just because you have some access to it. And then the bottom, I'll just hold this one in place. And same thing, I'll get this started. And if it's binding, you may need to move it side to side to just make sure that it's threading in nice and square. Once they're started by hand, you should be able to snug these down, and then we're going to tighten and torque them. So the top one is going to be a 3/4 inch socket, 9/16 for the bottom. Those torque settings are going to change between the two hardware just because one is smaller. So make sure you're doing that. You can also go ahead and get the other side done and to this point. I got my driver's side done, and I mentioned I'd let you know if I took anything else off. This large connector the main body connector, it looks like. This slides off of this white tab. Just slide that up. And then this one has just that plastic push pin. If you pop that out, you're gonna be able to separate this, making it a lot easier for this to get accomplished. So I got these torqued down. They're all good to go. And with this tab, what you can do is if you just bend it back and forth and just kind of wiggle it hard, that should snap off that little weld, leaving it nice and clean. If you need to, you can always cut it. And then this tab, I'm just gonna bend back in place. So our base plate is officially installed, but something that we're gonna wanna put in place is gonna be these safety cables and a quick link. And there's a spot you might have noticed on those side plates that has a hole to put our quick link, and we're gonna wrap this around the frame. And think of it as if this was to rip out for whatever reason, this is gonna be a last line of defense, so make sure that you're wrapping it around a frame that's gonna keep that in place. So you can go to this upper one and really just try to loop this around to where it's gonna be a nice, secure way to attach it. Now, this, theoretically, we should never have to use this. So if it's gonna be running into anything that's moving in the engine bay or really gonna cause any issue, you can zip tie this up out of the way. And it's gonna get a little bit trickier on the electrical side, on the driver's side, but I'll get these in place and then show you how they look. Got my safety cables installed, and this one pretty easy. I ended up looping an extra around here. Now, you're gonna have some of the belts and rotating assembly of the engine. So this one you really wanna keep tight against the metal and then just loop that around. Got this one in place. The other side, as I mentioned, because the wiring's a little bit trickier, so I did a different path. So I went up around this portion of the frame into the engine bay and tucked it back down before it comes down to this point, and then attached it here. So I will probably end up zip tying this up. That's gonna keep all of our electronics, once we put our box back in place, from rubbing against this. Now this step you may want to do now, you may want to do it later, because this is going to bolt up our air dam back in place, but we need to trim it to make it fit. And chances are you're going to have your breakaway switch and everything running wires here, so it might actually be easier to do this later, but I'll show you it now. What I'm going to try to do is really align these tabs to where it's going to snap in here at the top and bottom. And then we're gonna look for where our diode wiring studs are gonna be. And it looks to be right at, there's kind of a molding circle. At the bottom of that circle, I'm just gonna cut a notch on each side, and that way we can slide this back, and we may need to notch a little bit on these edges here. But that's gonna allow this to go back, look nice and clean, still have this shroud. But again, this may be something that you may wanna do after the fact just to get your wiring all ran clean. Completely up to you. So I'll cut some notches here and see how it looks. With that trimmed out, this does slide back, but we do have spots here where the receiver arm weld, the brace here is just a little bit wider than the plastic, but this is gonna give us a perfect little template to figure out exactly where we need to cut. So I'm gonna just mark that, and then I'll trim below that, creating a little slot on both sides. Now with those notches made, this slid on, I am gonna take this off and just kind of clear up some of my burrs and just clean up the cuts. But really, the only thing left to do at this point is get the rest of your flat toe components installed. And again, as I mentioned previous, this is a lot easier to do with the fascia off. So we're gonna get all of our flat toe components mounted up. We will need to also put our electrical components back in just the reverse order. But at this point, I'll meet back up with you when we have everything installed, and then I'll show you how to get the fascia put back on. Now I got all of our flat toe components all installed, and you might notice that I left our diode wiring and charge line to do last after the fascia's on, and that way sometimes the plug is a little bit larger than the opening, and I don't want to have to trim any more than I need to just try to maintain as clean of a look as possible. Now with that being said, we are going to need to do a little bit of trimming on the fascia, and it's minor. A tip that I would point out is when you're doing your diode wiring, if you've waited to do it, or you already have done it, I ended up drilling through here so our wires can attach to it. The boot plus the plug really is about the same width here. So I think this is gonna be the cleanest look rather than trying to kink some wires back. So let's head over to the fascia. We'll do some trimming and we can mock this up and we can trim more if we need to. Now, where we need to trim is actually pretty minor here. So just a pair of small snips should be enough. You'll see this lattice or this small little piece here on each side. This is where the arm and the safety chain loop is going to be. So we want to make sure that we have space for that. So I'm just going to take, I just got a zip tie cutter, and we'll cut there, and we'll cut down here, and then we'll repeat on the other side. When you're feeding this on, you may find that there's going to be some spots that you need to kind of push down to slide it over. The removable arms, I ran into that a little bit, but once you're there, it should kind of draw into place. Blue Ox did a really good job of designing this to work really well with the factory bumper. So if you're happy with the fit, finish up any of your rest of your components. I'm going to get my diode wiring done. Again, make sure that you have your electrical connection put back on. And then as far as reinstallation of everything, it's just going to be the reverse order that we took everything off. So with that being said, that's really going to do it for the installation of your Blue Ox base plate on your 2023 Ford Maverick.